I can't remember a time when my father wasn't an unpredictable presence in the house. Some kids grow up knowing that their dad's footsteps mean safety, comfort, a moment of peace. For me, his footsteps meant one thing: something's about to happen. He didn't always shout. That's the thing about my father, he didn't need volume to make you feel small. He had this way of looking at you, like his eyes were measuring how close you were to crossing some invisible line. Sometimes that look alone was enough to make me retreat to my room. It wasn't all bad, of course. That's what made it confusing. He could be calm for weeks at a time, almost like a normal dad watching TV, making small talk over dinner, fixing something around the house. But even then, I was waiting for the shift. The moment when something would set him off. There were small clues about his life before I was old enough to remember clearly. An old wooden box in the garage with strange glass pieces inside. A faded backpack with burn marks on the inside pocket. And those bongs always just around. He never hid them, but he never explained them either. He wasn't a heavy drinker. That was one thing my mother always told people, almost as if it made everything else more forgivable. He's not a drunk, she'd say. And it was true. But sobriety didn't make him gentle. I remember once, maybe I was 10 or 11, he came home and found a stack of dishes in the sink. Mom had been busy with work and errands all day, and I had been doing homework. He didn't ask why they were there. He didn't even say a word at first. He just picked up a plate and dropped it deliberately onto the floor. It shattered across the tile. That's how things get done around here, he said, and then he walked out of the room. We didn't talk about it afterward. That was the rule in our house, certain moments didn't get discussed. They just lived in the air, unspoken but unforgettable. Over the years, I learned how to read him. The slight tightness in his jaw meant he was annoyed. A sigh as he sat down meant something had gone wrong at work. If he got very quiet, almost too quiet, that was the worst. It meant he was thinking. Planning. Waiting for the right moment to release whatever was building inside him. Still, there were glimpses of a different man. Sometimes he'd fix my bike without being asked. Sometimes he'd bring home snacks for us kids without explanation. And then, a day later, he'd snap at my mother over something as small as the way she folded laundry. It was like living with two people at once, the father who could be kind, and the one who could make the air in the room feel dangerous. I think my mother saw it long before I did, but she had her own way of handling it. She never pushed too hard. She kept the peace when she could. And when she couldn't, she let the storm pass. She was good at pretending things were fine. Too good. Looking back, I think that's why I didn't realize just how fragile our family really was. I thought this was just how families worked. You learned your father's moods like you learned the seasons. You stayed quiet when you needed to. You avoided certain topics. You became an expert at making yourself invisible when the weather in the house turned. But storms don't stay small forever. And with my father, the real trouble hadn't even started yet. It started slowly, the way most big changes do. At first, I didn't think much of it when Dad began spending more time at the computer. We'd had that old beige desktop for years, one of those heavy monitors that made the desk groan under its weight. Before, he used it mostly for practical things, checking bills, looking up tools he wanted to buy, maybe printing something out for Mom. But after he went on disability for his arthritis and old work injuries, the computer became more than just a tool. It became his world. I'd walk by the spare room, what used to be our guest room, and find him in the glow of that screen, hunched forward in his chair, clicking away. The blinds would be shut even in the middle of the day. Some days, he'd still be in the same position when I went to bed at night. Mom would mutter about it when she thought no one could hear. He spends more time talking to strangers than he does with his own family, she'd say while doing dishes. But she wouldn't confront him. Not yet. At first, it was just chat rooms and message boards. I'd hear him typing away, laughing under his breath at something on the screen. Then came the webcams. I caught sight of one once, clamped to the top of the monitor like a mechanical insect, its little lens staring out into the room. It wasn't long before things got different. I remember the first package. A small box, covered in stamps I didn't recognize, with his name scrawled in a careful, almost delicate handwriting. He opened it in the kitchen while I was grabbing a snack. Inside were a few odd trinkets, keychains, small figurines, a packet of tea with characters I couldn't read. "Where's this from?" I asked. "Just a friend," he said quickly, closing the box. But soon, there were more. Envelopes with foreign postmarks. Polaroids of smiling faces. Little hand-sewn crafts. I noticed that he kept them all in his desk drawer, tucked away like treasure. One night, when he thought I was asleep, I walked down the hall for a glass of water and heard him speaking in a softer voice than I'd ever heard him use. It was the tone people reserve for someone they want to impress. Curious, I peeked in. On the screen was a woman. Her hair was dark and shiny, and she was smiling at him in a way I'd never seen Mom smile at him in years. She wore a bright red top and spoke with an accent I couldn't place. I froze in the doorway until Dad noticed me. "What are you doing up?" he barked. The softness was gone, replaced with the voice I knew too well. I mumbled something about water and slipped away. It didn't take long for Mom to notice. She didn't say much at first, but the tension in the house grew thicker by the day. The two of them spoke less and less, and when they did, it was sharp and short. Then came the day when Dad announced he was going on a trip. He said it casually, like it was no big deal. Just heading north for a bit, visiting some friends, he told us. But there was that edge in his voice, the one that meant don't ask questions. Later, I found out those friends were in Canada. And one of them was her. I didn't know it then, but that trip was the first real crack in whatever was left of our family. The kind you can't tape back together. When Dad came back from that trip up north, he was different. Not in a dramatic, overnight way, but in the little details you only notice when you live with someone. He was quieter at home, but not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't the brooding silence of a man who was unhappy, it was the content silence of someone whose mind was elsewhere. He'd eat dinner with us, nod along to whatever Mom was saying, then vanish into the spare room again. And the packages kept coming. They were more frequent now. Some arrived in padded envelopes, others in larger boxes. Sometimes there'd be small gifts for me and my brother, cheap knickknacks, colorful plastic toys, or candies with wrappers we couldn't read. He'd hand them to us casually, like they didn't matter, but there was always a flicker in his eyes when he did. As if we were part of some bigger plan we didn't understand. The woman, her name was May, started to feel like a ghost in our house. She was never physically there, but her presence hung in the air. I'd hear Dad on late-night calls, speaking in a tone that was gentle, almost rehearsed. I'd catch glimpses of her in pictures he left on his desk, smiling, leaning slightly toward the camera, dressed in a way that seemed designed to catch attention. Mom, for her part, didn't confront him directly. Not at first. She started keeping her phone on her at all times, speaking to her sisters in hushed tones. She stopped asking Dad about his day. She stopped looking at him during meals. The breaking point came months later, when May announced she was visiting Canada. Dad acted like it was just a coincidence that she happened to be only a couple states away, but we all knew better. He started preparing for another trip. He packed light, kept his plans vague, and left without saying goodbye properly. Just a wave from the doorway and a see you in a bit. Mom didn't cry when he left. She just went about her day like nothing had happened. But I could tell she was holding something in. When he came back, it was like he'd stepped further out of our lives. He spent more time online, more time locked away in that room, and less time acknowledging we even existed. It wasn't anger anymore, it was disinterest. And then came the shocker, he was going to Hong Kong. For a month. That was the first time I saw Mom lose her composure. She stood in the kitchen, holding a basket of laundry, staring at him like she was trying to figure out if he was joking. He wasn't. He'd already booked the tickets. He left without much fanfare. Just like before, no real goodbye, just a quick I'll be back before you know it. 2 weeks into his trip, Mom picked up the phone. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I heard her say the words that set everything in motion, I want a divorce. And I'm filing a restraining order. You're not coming back into this house. I don't know what he said on the other end, but Mom hung up, set the phone down carefully, and went back to folding laundry like it was just another Tuesday. That was the moment I knew nothing in our lives would ever go back to the way it was. When Dad came back from Hong Kong, he wasn't the same man who'd left. Before, even at his angriest, there was still a trace of the father I knew, the one who'd fix my bike tires or help me with homework when he was in a good mood. But this time, the moment I saw him, I realized that man was gone. His eyes were harder. Not the kind of hardness you get from being tired or upset, this was different. This was a man who had made up his mind about something, and whatever it wasn't good for us. He didn't come straight to the house. Mom's restraining order made sure of that. Instead, he stayed with his mother in the next town over. But that didn't mean we didn't feel his presence. It started with the little things. One day, Mom noticed that some of her tools were missing from the shed. A week later, our kitchen calendar was flipped open to next month even though none of us had touched it. At first, we thought maybe it was just us forgetting. Then, one afternoon, my brother came home early from work and swore he saw Dad's truck parked a few houses down, engine running. That was when we realized he'd been watching us. The real damage came a few weeks later. My brother's truck wouldn't start. He called a friend who worked at a shop, and after looking it over, the guy shook his head. There's fiberglass in the gas tank, he said. This didn't just happen by accident. We didn't need to guess who was behind it. Then Mom's car died. The mechanic found sugar in the fuel. I didn't even know that was a real thing people did until then. It was clear Dad wasn't going to just fade out of our lives quietly. He was angry in a way that didn't involve yelling or screaming anymore. This was a quieter kind of rage. Calculated. Patient. Around this time, he quit smoking. Just like that. One day he was lighting up 3 times before lunch, the next he was done. He also started losing weight fast. I think it was all part of this reinvention he was going through while he remodeled his new house a couple towns over. New body, new habits, new life, except for the fact that he still couldn't let go of us. Every now and then, he'd make a point of sending word through mutual acquaintances, little jabs about Mom's side of the family, half-truths twisted into insults. It was like he wanted to rewrite the story of what happened, make himself the victim in everyone else's eyes. We learned to be on guard. We double-checked locks, kept an eye out for strange cars, and stayed cautious. But the truth was, no matter how much we tried to protect ourselves, the shadow of his presence was still there. And then, suddenly, it wasn't. It happened the day before Thanksgiving. By then, Dad had been living mostly at his mother's house. We'd heard he was still working on his place, still keeping busy, still lurking on the edges of our lives. He'd send the occasional jab through people we both knew, but the sabotage had stopped. I don't know if he got bored, if it stopped feeling worth the effort, or if he was just focusing on other things. That morning was quiet. Cold. I remember the air had that still, heavy feeling that sometimes comes before the snow. We were in the middle of holiday prep, Mom in the kitchen, my brother and I going through lists of things we still needed from the store. Then the phone rang. It wasn't unusual for my grandmother to call, but the way Mom's face changed when she answered, that was different. Her lips pressed tight, her voice stayed flat, and she didn't look at us while she spoke. When she hung up, she just said, "Your father's gone." It didn't sink in right away. Gone could mean a lot of things. But then she explained how he'd been at Grandma's house, how he'd laid down for a nap in the afternoon, how at some point during the night his heart had failed. She said the doctors told Grandma it was sudden, massive, like his heart had just exploded. The details were strange. They said when they found him, all the blood had pooled to one side of his body. I don't know why that image stuck in my head, but it did. Even now, when I think about him, that's the picture that comes back first, not the man pacing the kitchen in a rage, not the man locking himself in the spare room with his computer, but the man lying still, all that noise and motion gone. There was no big scene. No funeral we were all expected to attend together. No last words. Just a quiet phone call on a gray morning, and then the slow, awkward process of figuring out what to do with the news. For all the damage he'd done, his death didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel like justice. It just felt strange. Like a door had slammed shut, but the echo was going to keep bouncing around for a long time. In the days after Dad's death, the house felt different. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. The constant background tension, that sense of watching for his shadow, was gone. We no longer checked the driveway every time a car slowed in front of the house. We didn't have to glance at the calendar to see if it had been moved. But his absence wasn't simple relief. It was complicated. Mom was quiet for a long time. She didn't speak badly about him after it happened, but she didn't paint him as a saint either. I think she was relieved not to have to keep defending herself from his accusations or guarding against his schemes, but there was a sadness in her that wasn't just about him. It was about the years lost, the stress endured, the way the whole thing had unraveled. My brother reacted differently. He was angry for a while, not at Dad's death, but at the fact that there would be no confrontation, no final conversation where he could say the things he'd been holding in. It was like a story that ended mid-sentence, and it drove him crazy. For me, it was a strange kind of numbness. I'd spent so much of my life seeing Dad as a storm to navigate around, unpredictable, sometimes destructive, that when the storm ended, I didn't know how to feel. I expected to feel free, but instead I just felt disoriented. The world kept moving. Thanksgiving still came, though it was quieter than usual. People still asked how we were doing, and we gave polite answers. The truth was, we didn't really know. In time, the details blurred. The sabotage, the trips, the late-night phone calls, they all became part of a larger haze in my memory. But certain moments never left me: the sound of Mom's voice on the phone when she told him she wanted a divorce, the sight of that calendar flipped open to the wrong month, the phone call the morning before Thanksgiving. Dad's death didn't erase the damage, and it didn't rewrite who he was. But it did close the chapter in a way that nothing else could have. And while we never got closure in the way people talk about in movies, we did get something quieter: the ability to move forward without looking over our shoulders. That, in its own way, was enough.